guys put your hands together and give them some love? Right on. We're going to keep on going in our story. We're in Matthew. If you're new, we are all the way to chapter 2, beginning in verse 13. It says, "Now when they had departed, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream and said, 'Rise, take the child and his mother and flee to Egypt, and remain there until I tell you, for Herod is about to search for the child to destroy him.' And he rose and took the child and his mother by night and departed to Egypt, and remained there until the death of Herod. This was to fulfill what the Lord had spoken by the prophet, 'Out of Egypt I called my son.' Then Herod, when he saw that he had been tricked by the wise men, became furious, and he sent and killed all the male children in Bethlehem and in all that region who were 2 years old or under, according to the time that he had ascertained from the wise men. Then was fulfilled what was spoken by the prophet Jeremiah. A voice was heard in Ramah, weeping and loud lamentation, Rachel weeping for her children. She refused to be comforted because they are no more. But when Herod died, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt, saying, 'Rise, take the child and his mother, and go to the land of Israel. For those who sought the child's life are dead.' And he rose and took the child and his mother and went to the land of Israel. And when he heard that Archelaus was reigning over Judea in place of his father Herod, he was afraid to go there. And being warned in a dream, he withdrew to the district of Galilee. And he went and lived in a city called Nazareth, so that what was spoken by the prophets might be fulfilled, that he would be called a Nazarene." Now we have multiple prophecies in this text that are sort of intersecting. And then we also have supernatural moments where in a dream, an angel is speaking to Joseph and giving him direction. We also have this unique moment where in obedience to what the angel told him, Joseph goes into Israel, but because of who was ruling, he was afraid. He did not want to go back to the place that he left when he left Israel. And so then in another dream, supernaturally, God directed him and he went on to Nazareth and then fulfilled sort of a conglomerate of prophecies that said that Jesus would be someone from an obscure place. He would be someone who would be despised and rejected. And so from those prophecies, it was understood that it was a place like Nazareth. So he fulfilled these prophecies in obedience to the direction of the angel. But in that moment, it all started because he just wasn't content in doing what he was doing. There are times in our lives where God will just sort of stir us or trouble us. We will have an awareness that what this is or where I'm going, this isn't just right. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. What I do know is this isn't it. And when you have those moments in your life, it is wise to just sort of stay put and just seek God and receive direction, because if He's stirring your heart to go in a different way, He will lead you to that place. God's not going to stir you up and let you know that where you are isn't right without giving you direction of where you're supposed to go. If He's redirecting you, it's not a puzzle. He will. If He hasn't given you exact direction yet, all it means is it's not time. One of the things that we notice as we study all of these prophecies that were predicting the birth of Jesus is that there were certain things that became more clear as the time approached. As we were further away from the moment when Jesus would be born, there were prophecies that lacked clarity. We didn't fully understand them. There will be things in your life, in the season that you're in, that you won't understand what's coming. You just know something is coming. But as you get closer to the time, what will also come with the passage of time is clarity. And so what we see here is that God is speaking in such a way to Joseph that He's bringing clarity to his path so he knows exactly what he is supposed to do. Now, I just want to sit on something here because it says, out of Egypt I have called my son. When we begin to just sort of study the word, and especially in this Christmas time, what begins to emerge is that God seems to work in patterns. Like what he did before, he will do again, so that as he begins to work the way that he has always worked, we can perceive that it's him. When there was ever a time when the promised land, or where they were supposed to be, fell into famine or a state that could not support them, we see God calling his children out to the unpromised land for a time so that they could be sustained there, so that they could prosper there, and then at a later time, he would bring them back to that promised place. There will be moments in our lives where to us this doesn't seem ideal. But God directs us in such a way to sustain us until where he has us is actually prepared for our coming. And so this is what was going on. They were not prepared for the coming of Jesus. The nation of Israel was not looking. The leaders were not looking for the coming of Jesus. They had not prepared a place. In fact, Herod was creating a very disruptive, chaotic place. And so God saved his son by calling him out of the promised land to the unpromised land. We see this all the way back in Genesis chapter 12 and verse 10. While Abram was in the promised land, it said now a famine was in the land, so Abram went down to Egypt to sojourn there. Why did he go to Egypt? Because there wasn't food where he was. There wasn't what he needed where he was, so God took him somewhere different to fulfill that which he needed. We see the same thing happen later with his grandchildren, where Jacob and his children go and they settle in that land of Egypt. But when they settled there, we see something interesting that we need to pick up. It said that they actually prospered there. And Exodus chapter 1 and verse 7 says, the people of Israel were fruitful and increased greatly. They multiplied and were exceedingly strong, so that all the land of Egypt was filled with them. So they didn't just go down to a place and suffer. They didn't just go down to a place of misery, but there was a season, there was a time when they were there where they prospered in that place. I'm just wanting to let you know, in case you haven't figured this out yet, that this place is not our home. Earth, the world, is not our home. But we are being kept here for a season until he comes again. And while we're here, God will prosper us, God will sustain us, God will keep us, God will lead us, he will direct us, he will protect us. God has a plan for us. Even in the place that isn't our final home, he will secure us where we are. But what we have to understand is God had them in Egypt, but he had no desire for Egypt to be in them. And we might be in this world, but we cannot let the world be in us. Let's talk about this from maybe an architectural perspective for a moment. In Egypt, they had temples that were there. There were actually these massive pyramids that had temples around them that they were sort of built they almost look like mountains. If you go sort of the world over, you will find temples that were built in ancient ages and even recent ages, and they were built to look almost like mountains. They were just these big sort of pyramid-shaped places with a small spot on the top that just the choicest, fewest people could get up there and some way, somehow be considered closer to their God. But it's interesting that when God called the children of Israel out of Egypt and he told them to build him a temple or a tabernacle, it didn't look like what they had built in Egypt. It didn't have the architecture of Egypt. It didn't look like a false mountain. Rather, what God told them to build was something that looked a little bit like a box. Or maybe it looked like the ark that God told Noah to build, where he brought him in and kept him safe. And then later, when God gave plans to David of a temple, and he built that temple, it still had that rectangular appearance. And when Jesus Christ was fully grown and he came into the temple and he ministered there, and then when he was crucified, it's fascinating that God didn't break down the walls of the temple. Rather, what he did was he tore the veil that was keeping people out so that more people could come in. They were building pyramids. They were building these triangular mountain-looking things that limited how many people could approach God. But when God said, I want you to build me a house, he built a house that could include a whole bunch of people. And he tore the veil that allowed people to come in and give him glory and give him honor and give him worship. So they didn't let what was in Egypt get in them. And we have to remember this as we walk on this world, in this world today. God doesn't want the world in us. God doesn't want the world in our churches. We have to be very careful that we don't build here what the world is building. That we don't create here what is entertaining as the world is being entertained. We have to be very careful that what we are promoting is not entertainment, but rather the worship of God. Because if we just come in here and it's entertaining, if we just come in here and it's fun, we've missed the purpose of our presence. Because our presence here is to be in his presence. Our presence here is not to be entertained. Our presence here is to enter into his gates with thanksgiving and enter into his courts with praise, that we would worship and praise and honor him and experience the fullness of the presence of God in the sanctuary. And we have to be the same way in our households. We can't build our houses inside to look like what the world looks like. We can't be entertained by the same thing that the world is entertained by. See, we have to make sure we are protecting ourselves. We see it like this in John chapter 15 and verse 19. Jesus said, if you were of the world would love you as its own. But because you are not of this world, but I have chosen you out of this world, therefore the world hates you. When you go to work, we should excel at work. When we sit in work teams, I don't care what they believe or don't believe. You should add value to that conversation. People should want you on their team because of the excellence, because of the quality of work, because of the peace, because of the encouragement that you bring to the team. Every work team should be better because you are on it. And as you are adding value to that place, through that place, you will prosper. Through that place, you will succeed. But here's what should also happen. As soon as the clock strikes that tells everybody to go home, you should be neglected in that moment when everybody is planning to go over here and do this, because they know all you're going to do is bring them down. They know you're not going to laugh at their jokes. They know you're not going to watch what they're watching. They know you're not going to talk about your spouse like that. They know that you're going to live a different lifestyle that is going to make them feel convicted about their lifestyle. So they don't actually want you to hang out with them after work. They want you during work. They want to leverage all that you have during work, but when it's time to go home, they're all going to be whispering around you, talking about where they're going and what they're doing, and they're not going to include you. They will exclude you, and that you might be tempted for that to hurt you. Let me just say, rejoice, because you are not of this world, therefore the world hates you. When you find yourself in school, you might have to go to school to get that education or to get that degree, but don't you let that school get in you. You might be in that place, but don't let the place get in you. He called them to Egypt to be comforted, sustained for a time, and then he called them out of Egypt. We're here for but a moment, and then we won't be here. And so we need to be living here in preparation for there. In Philippians chapter 3 and verse 20, the Apostle Paul said it like this. He said, "But your citizenship is in heaven, and from it we await a Savior, who is Jesus Christ the Lord. And from him, he will literally transform our lowly body to be like his glorious body." When Jesus Christ was born, the Word became flesh. In other words, he became like us. When he came the first time, he became like us so that when he comes the second time, we can become like him. The first time, the Word became flesh. But the next time he comes, the flesh is going to be glorified like the Son, where we will be with him for eternity. Because our citizenship is not here. Our citizenship is there. And so when we tell the Christmas story, we have to be aware of how God positions his coming the first time with his coming the next time. Maybe this is the most clear in the book of Revelation, chapter 12, beginning of verse 1. It says, "And there was a great sign in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon at her feet, and on her head was a crown of 12 stars. And then it goes on and it talks about beneath her was a dragon who was waiting to consume the child that she was pregnant with. And then we go to verse 5 and says, she gave birth to a male child, one who is to rule all the nations with a rod of iron. But he was called up to God and to his throne. So the king, the child, was called up. He is to rule, but he didn't rule because he was called up. And then it goes on and says, and the woman fled into the wilderness to a place prepared by God for her, where she will be nourished for 1,260 days. And so we have this moment where there's a sign in the heavens, and then there's something happening on the earth. And then there's another sign in the heavens and another something happening on the earth. And so let's just talk about these two things that are going on that were demonstrated by what is in the heaven and what is on the earth. First, the Christmas part. We see here depicted the birth of Jesus. The reason why we know it's the birth of Jesus is because the child was one who is to rule with a rod of iron. That was speaking of the Messiah. We see that back in the Psalms. We also see it in the earlier part of Revelation. This is a reference to Jesus Christ, the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. He would rule all the nations with a rod of iron. So the child being born is Jesus. Jesus was born of the Virgin Mary before she ever came together with her fiancé, Joseph. And so the virgin that we see in the sky is reflected on the earth through Mary. But what did that constellation look like in the heavens? If we kind of roll the calendar all the way back to the middle of September in 3 BC, what we find is the constellation of the Virgin in the sky above Israel, which that constellation comes around all the time. That's not what's so fascinating. What is fascinating was at that exact time, the sun, the woman was clothed with the sun. In other words, the sun was in the womb of the Virgin constellation, and the moon at the same exact time was at her feet. That's what was fascinating. The sign was the Virgin constellation had the sun in her womb and the moon at her feet. At the exact time this was going on, above her is the Lion constellation, and in the middle of this constellation is the king's planet, which was Jupiter, which was in alignment with the king's star, which was Regulus, so that they produced this massive, bright, shining star that was depicted on the earth, looking into the heavens, at the same time that what was said in revelation was happening in the sky. This was the skies, the signs in the heavens, both predicting and affirming what was happening on the earth. What was happening on the earth? A virgin girl named Mary, engaged to a man named Joseph, were in Bethlehem, and she was giving birth to the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, and they called him Jesus. Now, at that same time, wise men are coming, who come and they worship him, and they have a conversation with Herod on the way, and Herod says, oh, once you do, come back so I can worship him also. But then what happens is they're warned also to go a different way and not to return to Herod. So when Herod realizes that he has been tricked, what happens? He decides that he is going to kill all of the children up to 2 years of age. What was it in the sky that was there waiting for the child to be born? The same thing that was happening on the earth. The devil was working on the earth. It wasn't just Herod, it was the spirit behind Herod. We don't wrestle with flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers and rulers in the heavenly places. He was being motivated by an evil spirit to destroy the Son of God, to keep the Son of God from fulfilling his purpose on the earth. But here's what I want you to know. The same is true of us. The enemy is against us, but greater is he who is in us than he who is in the world. If God is for us, then who can be against us? If God warned Joseph and took him to a place where he would be sustained and took him to a place where his family was to be protected, do you not think that God Almighty can protect us in the world today? But we have to trust him. And trusting him means that we have to be ready for his coming. If you believed that Jesus Christ was coming again, if you believe that Jesus Christ was coming soon, how different would your life be lived right now? See, what we have right now is a season that is called the times of the Gentiles. It is a time where God is simply saving as many people as who will say yes to him. But just like there was a predicted end in Revelation, we are living in the moment that will eventually come to an end. We are living in these times of the Gentiles. We see it in Romans chapter 12, where there is this prophecy that the Apostle Paul says, lest you be wise in your own eyes. Do not be aware of this mystery, brothers. For a partial hardening has come upon Israel until the fullness of the Gentiles has come in. It was the same thing that Jesus predicted in Luke chapter 21 and verse 24. He said, Israel will be taken down, will fall by the edge of the sword, and they will be led captive among all the nations. And Jerusalem will be trampled under the feet of Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles are completed. So we see as soon as the child that was born in Revelation was taken up to the throne of God, we now have the beginning of what has been called the times of the Gentiles. So you and I are living in the times of the Gentiles. That means this is the time where God's focus is that he is building the church in fulfillment of the promise that he made to Abraham, that through him all of the nations would be blessed, through the seed of Abraham, who we call Jesus, that all the nations would be blessed. So right now, all the nations are being blessed. What is that doing to Israel? It caused a partial hardening to come upon them. It's not that they could not be saved. It's just that if you were born under the law, it's more complicated for you to accept and receive Jesus for who he says he is. It's not a hardening, it's a partial hardening. But I don't want to focus on that. What I want to focus on is not what God's not doing, it's what he is doing. What is he doing? He's building his church. That means the nations are coming into the kingdom. But there is an end to that. There is a moment that will no longer be the story, where the times of the Gentiles will come to an end. The times of the Gentiles began with Jesus Christ ascending. And the times of the Gentiles will conclude with the church ascending. He ascended so that we could ascend. He was raised so that we could be raised, where we will receive a glorious body. Here's the question. Are we preparing for his coming? I was at the mall the other day, and then I was there again. And I don't know how you feel about shopping, but I have Shawn's Christmas rule is that I don't shop more than once. I go once, and I usually go towards the end so that people have already taken out all of the options, and I'm left with just a few options so I can make a good decision with the few things that are left, and then I go home. I got to the mall, and I don't do good in the mall. It's just too much. I'm not super consumeristic. I don't I'm going to puff myself up for a minute. Can I talk about how awesome I am real quick? So I don't even hardly know brands. I was in a store and I'm there with Kate and she's like, what's wrong with you? I'm like, this is overwhelming. I don't even know what these brands are. There's all these names that I don't understand. They're written on the walls. I've never seen them before. Well, what's happened? What's happened to the world? There's a DJ in the middle of the department store. When did that start? I'm confused. I'm just there to buy a bag. And there's everything but bags. And I'm like, where are the bags? She says, they're back there. I'm like, okay. So I go and I'm looking at bags. Bags, y'all. I want to emphasize I'm looking at bags. One, I'm like, oh, that's cool. I look at it, $700 and some for a bag. Well, right next to it, here's a $700 bag, which honestly feels expensive to me. Clearly, you don't think it's that expensive, so okay. I go to the next row, and there's a whole bunch of bags. These don't have price tags on them. I don't know what that means. I tend to blame everything on lazy employees these days. I don't know how you feel about stuff, but everything is lazy employees' fault. So now I'm like, the guy that was supposed to put the stickers didn't show up, didn't put anything on here. Now I don't know how much it costs. So I'm manhandling this bag, trying to find how much this thing costs. And this lady comes by, she goes, oh, can I help you? And I'm like, yes, how much is this? She goes, $8,400. $8,400 for a bag that looked just like the bag that was here that I thought was overpriced at $700. I got up, I looked at Kate, I said, I can't do this, I can't do it. I just walk off. She's like, Dad, you can't just give up. I said, I give up, I'm done. I said, my dad used to tell me something as a kid. He said, son, a fool and his money doth soon part. And she goes, well, you need to figure out how to part with some of yours right now. But here's the thing. I walked out of that store thinking I'm better than all these people. Because I have not been dragged into the consumer trap of knowing what this even is. I was shocked because I'm so out of the world. I literally thought that. So I'm just but then I went and got in my car. Now, I might have seemed pretty righteous in the middle of the department store, but then I got in a car, and I'm in Christmas traffic, and I've got places to be, and I have things to do, and my driving was not nearly as sanctified as my walk out of the department store. So suddenly, I wasn't so ready for the coming of the Lord. Here's the point. Jesus Christ is coming back. He came the first time, and he's coming again. And it is necessary for us to recognize the signs in the sky, the signs of the times, because just like they announced his coming the first time and people missed it, I don't want us to miss his coming the second time. I'll behave on Christmas Eve. I'll wear a nice outfit. I might even wear a tie, probably wear a jacket, preach a nice evangelistic message that your friends and family are going to absolutely love. But right now, could I just take a minute and warn you and let you know that Jesus Christ is coming back, and this carnal nonsense and this lifestyle of hypocrisy that so many of us find ourselves in the middle of sometimes, we have to stop. We have to live like he's coming. We have to live like we actually trust that Jesus Christ is on the move, that Jesus Christ is coming back. Because here is what is happening. Paul prophesied that there would be a falling away in the church. And if you look at global church numbers, I'm not talking about certain individual churches like this one that just keep on growing, where the Spirit of the Lord just keeps showing up, because there are a whole bunch of people that say, I don't want the world, I actually want Jesus. So I'm going to go hang out in that place where I know Jesus is and I can experience him. But not every church is like this church. There are churches all over the world that are beginning to fail. There are churches all over the world where people are departing from them. Why? Because the great falling away has already begun. And as we are watching church numbers globally not increase, what we are also watching is that the nation of Israel is increasing. So globally, the church might seem to be decreasing, but the nation of Israel is increasing. Why? Because the times of the Gentiles are coming to an end, when Jesus Christ will lift us, the church, out of this world where he has us for a moment to be sustained, and he will take us soon to be with him. And when he does, he will shift his attention back to a nation called Israel, where he will pour out his wrath on the entire world, and he will save a nation, an entire nation, because they will see him for the first time. If you want to know what God is doing, that's what God is doing. And I know he's doing it because he did it once before. I know he's coming again because he came the first time. I know he's going to make good on his promise because he made good on his promise the first time. The Word became flesh and was born and laid in a manger, and they called him Jesus.